This morning I want to talk with you about the family you grew up in. Now you're going to hopefully see some applications to the family you're now in, maybe the family you're now raising. But more than anything else, we need to talk about the family you were raised in. Whether you think it was a good one, whether it was a bad one, we need to talk about it. And people who know you well, anybody that's going to be working with you closely, anybody, especially if they're going to be married to you, they need to understand what the forces were that made you what you are. What were the things that shaped you, for better or for worse? In fact, I'll say this, I don't think we can really know another person well if we don't know anything at all about how they grew up. Because if we don't know anything about how they grew up, there's going to be this big blank spot in our understanding of them. We're not going to get or even begin to understand how their mind works and why, how they are programmed, why they do the things they do, say the things they say, why they act and react the way that they do. Now, I'm not saying that it all goes back to family. This is not, I definitely am not trying to say that we're just victims of our family, for better or for worse. We all got free wills of our own. And actually, to grow as a person, to grow as a Christian, is to outgrow any bad habit, any unhealthy attitudes that you started out with. It's my responsibility to do that. We take what we were given, whatever that was, and then it's our job to make the most of it. But I know that it's hard for a lot of us to talk about, even to think about our childhood, if it was a painful childhood. Some are just trying to forget it. But the reality is, unless you get amnesia or Alzheimer's, you're probably not going to really forget it. You can push it to the back of your mind. You can avoid anything or anybody that reminds you of it. But all those forces, all those factors are still in you. They're still influencing you. And to ignore that, to ignore a message like this, it's like ignoring the possibility that you may have termites in your home. Think about termites in your home, in the wood, in the framework, the supports, the joists of your house. You can ignore that for a long, long time and everything still looks fine on the outside. People driving by may be impressed with how nice your home is. People who come inside may have a wonderful time there. Go home wishing they had a house like yours. And even you don't know that there's an invisible little force at work in the dark places, underneath the surface of all that good-looking stuff, that is slowly eaten away until one of these days, out of the blue, something comes crashing down. In one way or another, I guess what I'm saying is your life starts falling apart. Relationships, your personal peace of mind, your self-discipline, who knows? But it starts falling apart. Now, I don't know what it's like to grow up in a really, really tough home, the way some people do, the way some of you do. I don't know how I'd have made it if I'd had to have grown up like some people did. I don't know what it's like to be orphaned. I don't even know what it's like to have my parents divorced. I haven't experienced that. Many of you know what that's like. I sure don't know what it's like to grow up in a crack house or in a home that's basically a meth lab with bad people coming and going and me getting trampled and abused in the process. I don't know anything about that. Oh. And thankfully, many of you don't know anything about that. Be glad you don't. But just know this, even if you grew up in what everybody else in town considered a respectful family, your parents stayed together, never had to call the police to break up a fight between your mama and daddy. There was no physical abuse, no sexual abuse, not even any cursing, no alcohol in the home. There are still a whole lot of ways. Now, we're not talking about feeling sorry for anybody or anybody being a victim here. What I got to say to you is this. It's possible that even if you grew up in a home like that, the good kind that I just described, you were still raised by imperfect people. You were still raised by people who probably did the very best they knew how to do. And yet they still did wrong. They still planted some seeds they shouldn't have planted. They still set some examples that you'd have been better off without. My kids I've still got one at home. And another one only 2 years through college, and I can already tell some of the mistakes I made. I can already see some things I wish I could take back, but it's already too late. By the way, if you happen to be going through a phase where you're kind of angry at one or both of your parents because of what they did or didn't do, whether they were extremely awful and everybody knew it, or whether they were just bad in a way that only you experienced, whatever the case, let me just say this. If you grew up in a respectable family, but you still were taught some things were modeled that messed up your way of thinking and operating, you're like a person with an invisible handicap. You know, just on the physical plane, there are obvious physical handicaps. If a man's got no legs, everybody can plainly see that. And nobody wonders why he's not working on a pipeline somewhere. Nobody expects things of him that he's not capable of doing. On the other hand, I've had a friend or two with Crohn's disease. That's something I have not had. I don't even understand fully what that is, but I know it's an internal thing. It has to do with your digestive system. You can't digest, and it's one of those painful things. But to look at you, what's wrong with you? Why don't you get with it? To have grown up in a respectful family doesn't mean that you don't have painful things that need to be corrected. No. Nobody needs to feel sorry for you. That'll only make it worse. You sure don't need to feel sorry for yourself. That'll only take you down. But it may be that you need to recognize, perhaps for the first time, recognize that really did have an effect on me. And as long as I keep pretending it didn't, it will continue affecting me. It's a termite in the wood. And this is something that applies to everybody. And I hope I've communicated that by now. That's what was happening in the Bible story we're reading about today. Story of Jacob and his brother Esau. One of the first biblical families that we read about in the Old Testament. How many times have you heard people use the phrase, we need a biblical family? We need a return to biblical family values. We need to model our homes after the homes we read about in Scripture. Well, that sounds good, and I certainly think it's good to model your home after the teachings of Jesus and a whole lot of other teachings that are there. But if you actually want to pick out a family from the Bible who had it all together, and you want to model yourself after them, who are we going to pick? Well, let's think about that for just a minute. We could take David. David, man after God's own heart. He was a giant killer. He was a beautiful songwriter. But one of his sons killed another of his sons, murder, and then the one who murdered the other set out to murder and destroy David, his own father. And so David and his son found themselves at war, and that son was killed, that son Absalom was killed in the process of the war. And then, of course, a lot of that was tied in to David's adultery that he committed with Bathsheba. Then he committed, he set up a murder by having her husband killed so that he could marry her. And that child, out of that union, became the next king. Is that the family you want? Well, then there's Jephthah. We studied about him 3 months ago. Jephthah was a child who didn't know who his father was. He killed one of his own daughters, thinking he was pleasing God. Even Moses, Moses' family looked strong in the beginning. He had this big sister Miriam who loved him. And she stuck by him when his little basket of bulrushes, of his little basket of weeds, was pushed out into the reeds, and she watched, and she offered to help take care of the child when Pharaoh's daughter wanted to adopt him. So here's a case where the family relationship between the brother and sister started out beautiful, but it turned sour because 40 or 60 years later, she completely decided she was going to turn against Moses, tried to turn a whole bunch of other people against Moses, and it succeeded to a degree before she wound up hurting herself. You know, if you try bad enough, you spend enough time trying to destroy the credibility of another person, you'll ultimately destroy yourself in the process. That's what happened with Miriam. One more, Samuel, the very first prophet of Israel. He grew up in the temple. One reason he grew up in the temple is that his father had two wives who couldn't get along. They were constantly fighting and bickering. There wasn't room enough in the house for all of them. And so when he was finally born, that's one of the reasons. It's a long story, but that's part of the puzzle that ultimately led to him becoming a prophet, which shows, by the way, you can come from sure enough messed up family backgrounds and still grow into a remarkable man or woman of God who knows how many people. That's what happened. But I guess what I'm saying is you don't have very many, if any, ideal examples because the Bible is made up of real people that I can relate to. Real people that you can relate to. We read them and we see that, man, if their home life was that bad and God managed to do something good with their life, then surely He can do it with my life. But in order for God to make me into something better, in order to form me into an instrument that can be used for good rather than one that's used to destroy and to hurt. You know, the same scalpel can be used for a surgery that saves a life. It could also be used to rip a person to pieces. And when we're in the wrong frame of mind, we're capable. And so let's look at this family of Jacobs in a little more detail. I want to start with Genesis chapter 27. In fact, before I do, there's one verse I want to read, because I take that back. We will start with 27. Genesis 27, verse 5. Genesis 27, verse 5. The situation here is you had a family with a lot of sibling rivalry. You had something very common. I hope this doesn't exist in your family, but if it does, now's the time to start doing something about it, even if the children are grown. The father had one favorite, the mother had another favorite, and that's a recipe for fighting and resentment among the children. She was trying to help her son Jacob, the father trying to help his son Esau. And the father was getting ready to bless his son Esau, beginning the process of handing the inheritance, a rich inheritance. These were wealthy people, handing it over to Esau. His mother saw what was going on, and she didn't have the social authority to walk into her husband's tent and say, "Look, here, honey, let me tell you how it's going to be. Jacob is getting the inheritance." That woman didn't have that option at that time. A lot of women still don't have that option, but there's one option that women have always had, and that is the back way around. And that's the one she took. A way that I'm sure none of us have ever considered taking. But she did. Genesis 27, 5-7. But Rebekah overheard what Isaac said to his son Esau. So when Esau left to hunt for the wild game, she said to her son Jacob, "Listen, I overheard your father say to Esau, 'Bring me some wild game and prepare me a delicious meal. Then I will bless you in the Lord's presence before I die.'" She's letting Jacob know, here's what's happening. Let's come up with a plan. And most of you know the plan that I don't have the time to explain in detail. But basically, she killed a goat, prepared it. She dressed Jacob up in woolly clothing and put skins on his arm. And he tricked his father. He pretended to be his brother, tricked his father. And that shows you what kind of mother shaped Jacob. That's the kind of mother he grew up with. She was a woman who was going to get her way one way or another. She would win by dishonest means. She would win by any means, but she was going to win. Even though it meant a whole lot of crookedness, which her son naturally became entwined with. He naturally saw that and took that on. Jacob, by the way, was a trickster from the beginning. You may know that when Jacob and Esau were born, the twins, as they came out of the womb, Jacob was holding on to the heel of Esau. And so he was given the name Jacob, which means heel grabber. The idea being, this is a man who knows how to trip up his brother. To trip, the idea of grabbing somebody's heel, causing them, tripping them, falling, it's not a straightforward attack. It's a sneaky way. And that became Jacob's way of operating throughout his life, all the way up until he was a much older man and had a life-changing conversion experience. That's the way he operated. Everywhere he ever went, he did what Mama taught him. But all of this dishonesty, all this sneaking around, misrepresentation of the facts, that was a family tradition. It didn't just start with Jacob or his mother Rebekah. It went back to his parents and his grandparents, and who knows how far back before them. For example, Genesis chapter 12 verse 11 and 12, Abraham, who's Jacob's grandfather, he and his wife Sarah, who was fairly young and apparently beautiful at the time, were heading down into Egypt because there was a famine where they were. They went down to Egypt looking for a storehouse of food. On the way down, the Bible says this: as he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarah, "Look, you are a very beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife. Let's kill him, then we can have her.'" I don't have time to read all the verses that follow, so let me summarize. With this being the situation, if we go the way we're planning, they're going to kill me and take you. What a shame that would be. They're going to take you anyway. Why should I get killed over it? And so he made up a lie that was the most convincing kind of lie. It was a half-truth. She was his half-sister. So when he got to Egypt, they said, "Is this your wife?" They were already undressing her with their eyes, basically. And he said, "Oh, no. This is my sister. This is my sister, Sarah." I want you to see is way back with Grandpa. This looking out for number one, regardless of how it affects anybody else, willing to lie, willing to scheme, coming up with scheming plans ahead of time. That's in the family bloodline. And as for Isaac, his son, and Rebekah, the father and mother of Jacob and Esau, you may recall that when Abraham was looking for a wife for his son Isaac, he sent the servant back to his own people, his own family. "Bring back someone who's in my tribe." And he did. But you know what came with that? She's from my family. She's got some of the same stuff in her that I got in me. So you brought another schemer into the... That's the way these things work. And there's a term that's becoming more and more popular. The term is memes. Everybody's heard of genes, not blue jeans, but DNA, genes, Genes, genes. That's what you inherit genetically. Well, researchers are now talking also about memes, M-E-M-E-S, memes. It's not about genetics, it's about your memories, it's about what you grew up with, it's about the unspoken assumptions that you just absorbed. It's about the ways of doing things that you just took on without question. It's about attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, actions, reactions, words. It's all that. And that's why dysfunctional families stay dysfunctional generation after generation unless somebody says, it's going to stop with me. It's got to stop with me. And by the way, the person who says that if you happen to be the person in your family line who decides it's going to stop with you, do not expect the rest of the family to applaud you. Whether you come out and say it, which I don't recommend, by the way, don't announce it. Don't tell them there's something wrong with them. That will get you nowhere. It'll only cause the kind of controversy you had in Jacob's family: resentment, distrust, favoritism, all that. Just set out to live your life in a better way, in a different way. Set out to do what the Bible teaches us to do in Romans 12:2. I want to throw that one up on the screen. Romans 12:2. This is a verse you've heard me use and apply in other ways. But right here and right now, I want to apply it to you and your family. And this is just as true whether you're 84 or whether you're 14 or 44. Here's what it says. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Apply this to the family, and here's the deal. You were formed according to the pattern of the family that raised you. That's the pattern. And if you've not yet done anything to break that pattern, then you are currently still conformed to it. And the Bible is saying the only way you're going to change that is to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now I'm going to give you a quick example from real life. I'm going to tell you about a friend named Ray. I got acquainted with a man named Ray who's about the same age I am. He grew up in a home where everything looked fine on the outside. His father was a businessman. His mother was respected in the local social circles. They were church-going people involved in Vacation Bible School. The mother was. She taught Sunday school. The father was a deacon. There was no beer in the house. There was never a cuss word said in the house. It's the kind of home that Ray is very grateful for to this day. And he's often reminded me what an unusually tremendous blessing it was for him to grow up in a home like that. But if that's as deep as he goes, he will live out his life completely blind to some of the things he picked up in that picture-perfect home. And he will spend his life reacting to triggers that he doesn't even understand. He will live his life behaving in ways that he assumes are normal and acceptable because what any kid grows up with, they assume is good. It's what mama and daddy do. Well, in his home, there were just a few little things. Thank God, there were only a few little things that affected any of those kids in a negative way. But all three of those kids have had problems in adulthood, especially in relationships, because of some of the programming that happened at an early age. And all three of those kids get together and respectively talk occasionally about what they learned by example, how that's not worked, and what can we do to make sure it stops with us. The father in Ray's home had been a high school football star, and he really wanted his sons to be the same. One of them naturally was, one of them naturally was not. And so naturally, it wasn't something that had to be thought through, it just happened. the one that was not not into football, he couldn't really understand, and nothing was ever done to build a relationship from basically age 11 on down to the present. The other one became a favorite because he was able to live through this boy to a degree. He was incredibly involved in this boy's life, still is. And one thing all the kids learned about this father is, here's the way you know if father disapproves of what you just said. If he thinks what you just asked or what you just said is dumb, stupid, ridiculous, just plain wrong, whatever, the way he'll respond is to say nothing at all, to ignore you as if you didn't even say a word. Well, could have been a lot worse. Could have gotten cussed out over it. I guess those kids could have. But all three of those kids have noticed that their first reaction, even today, if they say something, if they make a comment, if they initiate any kind of conversation, and the person they're talking with says nothing, the automatic assumption and the automatic gut feeling that comes is, what I just said was either stupid, it was wrong, and it's probably made them mad. There's something bad wrong with me. That's the kind of stuff I want you to look for in your relationships with children and grandchildren, and look for those kind of patterns in your own life. The girl in that family, well, she grew up with a mother who'd been a beauty queen, homecoming queen and beauty queen. And this little girl was born, and she was so cute the first 4 or 5 years of her life that everybody said she was going to be Miss America. But when she was 6, she started gaining weight. And by the time she was in 6th grade, she weighed probably over 200 pounds, by far the biggest kid in her class. And when that happened, her mother put a distance. And to this day, she says, I could tell she was embarrassed by me. Maybe it's understandable, I suppose. But my mother was embarrassed by me. She didn't take me anywhere anymore. We didn't go places together. She wasn't involved. She didn't go to anything I was involved in until in late junior high school, the girl lost weight. Lost it all. Once again, got pretty. Cheerleader. In the cool crowd at school. Went to college and had a preppy sorority life, and all of a sudden mama's love and interest and fascination and involvement was back. And she learned, the girl learned from that whether or not I'm loved basically comes down to how I look. And so to this day, she struggles with weight issues. Even though she's very, very thin, she still doesn't feel thin, if you know what I'm talking about. Am I saying feel sad or sorry for that family? Heck no. No. I'm saying you've got things that are influencing you. This is not even ultimately about your kids or grandkids. I'm talking to you. I'm saying begin praying this prayer. God, show me myself. as the psalmist prayed, search me, O God. Know my inmost parts. And show me what's there and what I need to do. I want to exterminate these termites before the whole house comes tumbling down here. I won't be able to continue and talk about that turning point that came in Jacob's life. That'll have to be later. Right here, right now, I want to talk about a turning point in your life. At some point, everybody in this room has got to do one of two things. If you're one of those people who refuses to think or even talk about the things that have made you what you are, then reality is you probably have no clue who you are or why you do the things you do, why you say the things you say. And when you don't understand yourself, you're just operating blind, and you're going to hurt a lot of people until you see the truth, and the truth makes you free. But there are others, bound to be others, who know all about your early home life. And you could write a book about how bad you were treated and all the sad sob stories, because you tell them over and over and over to anybody who will listen about what your father was like or what he wasn't like because he wasn't there, and all these mistreatments, and you're so hung up on your story that you live the life of a victim, and nobody wants to keep hearing that. And so you distance yourself from some of the very people who could help you. Today's the day you recognize, look, I already know what happened. I'm one of those who already get it. And I need never, ever again retell that story. What I do is I get some help in moving on. And I will not be like Lot's wife, who kept looking back and eventually got frozen, stuck, as a pillar of salt, permanently looking back. Looking back is something you do temporarily to see what you need to see. Then you turn and move forward. Let's move forward.